Hello, good afternoon. Can all of you hear me all right? Right, excellent. Well, it's a joy to be here. And I think my topic was, as you all read, upholding kingdom values in a competitive environment, right? And what I'm going to share here is how I have applied the core principles from the Word of God as I navigated through this secure corporate journey, right, as a Christian professional. And I can proudly stand here and say that His grace has been sufficient, right? And like I always tell, people who are close to me that I'm probably the weakest and the most broken vessel that God, in His infinite wisdom, chose to use, not because I was capable, not because, I was ready, but because He is enough. And I think that is the key that has carried me forward in these 25 years of my journey, right? Like they introduced, I've been working and learning constantly across a multitude of diverse corporate setups, media houses, IT services, consulting houses, each with very different threads of their own cultural values, the way they do their work, the way they manage people, right? And as many of you know, it's not easy. It's really, really challenging as we work through this competitive environment and try to make your mark, right? Now, to be honest, there are times when I feel like I need to have the wisdom of Solomon, I need to have the resilience of Job, all the while with the speed of a Formula One racer, right? And with a smile on my face, trying to meet the multitude of expectations and deadlines that are thrown at you. Well, that is the corporate environment and the race that I think each one of us run every single day, right? But what is it that has actually really kept me going, right, in this environment is depending on Him. But before I say that, right, what is this culture and what are these value systems that we are talking about, right? Now, some of the things that hold the thread of the ways of working in a corporate environment is, the way I say it, hyper-individualism, hyper-inclusivity, self-promotion, right? And instant gratification. These are just to name a few of the themes that rule today's corporate world, rule the ethics of how things are played out in the corporate environment. So what is this hyper-individualism? I'm not going to go into each one of this, but I'd like to talk about two things. Hyper-individualism. The world defines it as, it's me. It's all about me. It's about my brand. It's about my success, right? It's about how I promote myself. And I'm sure each one of you here, I'm sure, has felt the pressure, right, to promote yourselves as the star of the show in the organizations you are, while deep inside, I think we all know we are still figuring out the next step, right? So what is this hyper-inclusivity? Well, inclusivity, on one hand, is a beautiful thing, and I agree, right? What it does is it invites everyone to the table, but what are we including in the name of inclusivity? And I'm not just talking about LGBTQ or Cure Group or any of that. The moral standards, right? The very thread of what is being asked as accepted in our ways of working today, right? And we could go on, right? When we talk about self-promotion, we talk about instant gratification. Results is what is required in every aspect of what you do, right? That is what rules today's competitive environment. That is what rules this complicated corporate setup that we're all part of, right? But as I was kind of thinking about this topic, right, when I started preparing, I realized that this is not so vastly different from what the children of God have actually faced from ages past. There are so many numerous examples, right, that we can find in the Bible where people have been displaced, they have been in alien cultures, and how they still stood up with the biblical standards and kingdom values, right, and made an impact. And so today, the way I'm trying to kind of walk through it is there are three characters that I've kind of taken as examples from the Bible, right? Esther, Daniel, Joseph. And these three characters, and there are numerous others, but I chose these three because very simple traits of how they have lived their life and the behaviors that we can imbibe from them to be able to navigate the corporate world. Because these examples, if you see Esther as a queen, Daniel as the head of affairs right next to the king, who served under a multitude of kings, and Joseph, again, next to king, right? All their professional roles. How did they live and still upheld kingdom values? I think there are timeless examples that we can draw from there. Right, so I'm just going to kind of go. So I'm sorry, I can't see the slide. So I'm going to start with Esther. Now, the three key traits that kind of stood out from Esther was humility, boldness, and prudence. Right? So I'd like to call on the verse Esther 2:15. Now, this was right at the start, right, when Esther is brought to the king. She did not just depend on her physical attributes, because that's what they were being chosen upon, right? But she listened to Haggai and only asked for what Haggai counseled her to ask for. And therefore, she won the favor of everybody who saw her. What that shows to me is she took counsel. She was humble enough. She didn't rely on her traits. She didn't rely on her strengths, but she was willing to take counsel. The next example is when, the whole Haman's plan was unfolding, and Mordecai comes and talks to Esther about, okay, you have to now go and talk to the king. Well, she was scared, like any of us. She was very scared. But then again, I think in Esther 4:16, we say, she actually tells Mordecai, go tell all the Jews in Susa, right, to fast and pray for 3 days, and I and my attendants will do the same. Another trait of humility, because she didn't just rely on herself to fast and pray, she was willing to ask people, pray for me, pray with me before I do it, right? So the lesson that I have taken from and through my career, I think, is never ever relied on what I brought to the table. That was never my presentation or my offering. Whenever I was faced with anything in the corporate world, it was humility. I would just take it to the Lord and say, Lord, lead. And I have several godly friends who are on speed dial, who I would reach out and say, pray for me, this is happening, and I don't know how to handle it. Are we humble enough to be able to kind of take counsel? Are we humble enough to reach out? And the next thing that we see in Esther's life is boldness. Esther's courage, right, in standing in front of the king. Now, like I said, she was fearful, she was scared. So courage is not the absence of fear, like we all know, right? But it is standing up in spite of being afraid. And so I think verses Esther 4-16, that whole and she ends by saying, if I perish, I perish, right? Shows that she's bold enough to take that stand to be in the presence of the king and fight for what she's, asked to do. And the third is prudence. Why do I say prudence? Now, Esther was the queen. She was humble. She took counsel. She goes before the queen, the king, and king reaches out a scepter and she's got his favor. Does she rush in and say, you know what, king, these are my problems, help me? She doesn't do that. She deliberates, she is patient, and she takes the king, right, tells him and Haman to come for a banquet, and she does that twice. When the time is right, she asks for what she wants. And I think humility, being prudent, being deliberate, taking the wisdom of God, and then, being bold to take a stand, I think are critical things that we all can take in life. I'm going to talk about an instance in my career journey, right, where I had to kind of stand back and apply these. So this was I think, in one of the organizations where I had joined, and by God's grace, I was able to probably, produce results. And so my boss says, okay, I'm going to put you up for promotion this year. And as you all know, there are business cases to be prepared. And, he had sent me the form and the document, and I was supposed to work on it. I prayed about it. I didn't feel the prodding to actually go do the form and send it back to him. So I'm deliberating and I'm sitting on it. Meanwhile, my boss was very vocal on the floor, stating that, you're going to be promoted, let's do this. Obviously, it didn't sit well with a lot of people, a few people around me who felt, she's just a year into the organization. And whatever the reasons, there was a lot of conversations, there was character assassination, and all of which came into, my knowledge. Of course, my boss heard about it too. It didn't bother him. And he said, okay, no, do your form and send it. I prayed, I deliberated, I never sent the form. The last day came, my boss calls me and says, why haven't you sent me the form? I need to, do it now. And I told him, I said, I'm not at peace. And when I'm not at peace, I don't think this is the right move for me. And I just didn't do it, and the day passed, and then in our one-on-ones, he said, this was a disrespect to me because I was pushing for your case. I was fighting against all odds of everything that everyone was talking. And I told him, thank you for that, but I cannot take a step unless I'm at peace and I know that that's what God is taking me into. And he just turned around, for those of you who know Hindi here, he just turned around and said, पहली बार जिंदगी में ऐसे एक नमूने को देखा है मैंने. I don't know how many of you understand. For the first time in my life, I have seen a specimen like you, where the boss is saying, I'm going to promote you, but you didn't give it, and you're sitting on it, making, giving all power to everyone who spoke about you. And I said, those who spoke, spoke. But what I'm governed by is what God is leading me into, right? I took that step back at that moment, and after all the deliberations and everything, and I chose not to kind of go with the tide that could have pushed me years away from my next growth, because I was going against what my boss wanted, I was going against what the norm was. But I think when God leads you, He put me there, and He let me grow in that organization to the level that I was leading a business. So promotions came, I grew, but in his own time and with his grace and strength. So I think that, to me, so in our corporate worlds, I think all of us are going to face a zillion situations, right? Are we pushing goals? Are we pushing our growth ambitions? Is it wrong to be ambitious? No. God has called us to be conquerors. He has called us to be kings, right? Absolutely not wrong to be ambitious. Absolutely not wrong to want to grow. But always conditioned by the foundations that we have in the Word of God. Is it His timing? Is it the right role? Is this the place where I need to grow? And if we only take a moment to listen to Him, we will know, we will hear His still small voice leading us. And I think that is the key. The next character that I want to talk about is, of course, Daniel. We all know Daniel's story, right? But the key things from his story are integrity, excellence, unwavering faith. Of course, I'm not going to repeat the story of Daniel because I think we've all grown up hearing that, right? But I'll call out the key things now. Integrity. Two key places where I want to call out his integrity was, of course, Daniel, as we all know, was brought into Babylon, right? And in today's world, the word enculturation, in those days, those youths were enculturated into the Chaldean culture, right? They had to learn the literature, the language, the cultures, the customs. So they were put through that entire enculturation process, of course, where Daniel shined. But at the start of that process, I think we all know, is there is a point where all those youths, right, they were supposed to eat the food from the king's table, royal food, because they were being trained into, to serve the royal. David chose not to defile himself with that. And he very prudently negotiated that in terms saying, we would like to eat just vegetables, we know the story. But when the chef said, no, but I'm going to be questioned, he said, try it out, for so many days, if it works. First instance of integrity. Now, why is this instance so important to me? When we are in our career journeys, right, a lot of times, if we've been given an opportunity, we think, oh my God, I'm special now. Now I will do anything to win this race. Daniel could have done that. He was brought in captivity, right? He was being trained. This was an opportunity. But he chose to stand up for his values, integrity. The next instance where I think integrity was, we all know when, I think under the rule of Darius, right, where all the satraps and administrators and everyone, because Daniel was put above everyone. He was fantastic at his role. He showed excellence, so he was put up. So his colleagues and peers there obviously didn't like it. So they started looking into him to see if there is anything that they could take against him. And you can see in Daniel 6, 4-5, right, where they say they could find no corruption in him, right? He was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. This is a direct testimony to his integrity in the way he conducted his affairs, right? The people around him could not find a reason to pull him up and say, you know what, you've done this. And the last, before I kind of talk about my example, is excellence and unwavering faith, right? So excellence we saw, the previous example where we said, right, he conducted his affairs so well that king put him on top of all the affairs. He was managing everything, and everything that Daniel did was blessed because God's favor was on him, right? Then in Daniel, again, 17 to 20, it goes back to the same example that we started, the 4 men who were brought from Babylon, right? And in the end, when the king was evaluating these men, these young men, it says that king could find no one in the whole kingdom who was better than these 4. Excellence, right? So the way he conducted his affairs, the way he dealt with the opportunities given to him was with integrity and with excellence. Unwavering faith. We know the story where he was thrown into the lion of dens, and before that, right? When the decree was sent out, Daniel knew it, and it says in the Bible, he knew the decree. He goes up to his room and opened his windows, turned towards Jerusalem and prayed like he had done always. Even though he knew a decree had been passed, it didn't stop him from respecting his faith, from doing what he had to do, giving the first accord to the Lord. And I think these are key things that we can all take in our journey in the corporate world, right? Now, an example that came to my mind when I was trying to think about all of this is pretty early in my career. I think when I was just starting off in my mid-management levels. In one of the organizations, I had a manager who was a huge micromanager. He had to have his head into everything that everyone was doing every minute. And in this place, we had a group of other Christian colleagues. And every day we would get out for about 20 minutes. We would go down, we would worship and intercede for each other. That was something that we just religiously did. And my manager would keep watching me every single day. Where does she disappear? And we had a time, we would leave at 11:15 and we would be back at about 11:40. So that was our window. He would keep watching. Every day he would question, and I would say, oh, we're just going and we'll come back. One final day, I think he somehow figured out, because he might have seen couple of Christians are slipping out. He stopped me and he said, you're here for work. And you have 4 or 5 projects that are so critical that I've given to you. And every day you just disappear instead of paying attention. We have to send these deliverables. Of course, I felt a little scared, but I just stepped back and I said, this is my break time. And in this break time, a few of us friends, we join together and we pray. If you find any lack in my projects, then you let me know. And I will come back to you. But as long as all the projects are running well, I will continue to pray. And if not this time, we will find another time to pray. And he was annoyed for a few days. He wasn't happy. I did have a few conversations, one-on-ones with him, which were not too pleasant because he thought it was insubordination. But when all of those projects went live, those were the very first projects in that organization where we got an NPS score of 10 on 10. The management had nothing more to say. So I think when we, with our faith, give first, absolutely the first place to honoring God in our workplace, when we submit everything that we do to Him, and if our work speaks excellence, and if we do it with integrity, God takes us through this corporate journey, no matter what the culture, no matter what the ethics, could be difficult, but we are there. And the next example is Joseph. Some similar themes would be there: steadfastness, which is I think, him, holding on to his faith. So steadfastness is there, forgiveness, patience, the other three key streams. Now, what is steadfastness? I think we all know the story of Joseph. When I was a kid and I used to read the story of Joseph, to me, it was nothing short of a soap opera, right? He was the favorite child of his father. He was betrayed by his brothers. He was sold to slavery. And in a strange land, he became the master of an Egyptian's household. He found favor there. And then he was lured, wrongly accused, put into prison, where he was in the prison for, I think, almost 2 to 3 years. And then, at the right time, Pharaoh had a dream, and, Joseph was the one who could interpret that. He was brought out. He gained favor in the eyes of the Pharaoh, and he was next to Pharaoh in all the affairs, right? We know the entire story. I used to be thrilled reading it, the whole story always. But as you grew up and I started meditating on it, his steadfastness, he had a dream when he was a kid. And that was a dream nobody else believed. But it was a dream God put in his mind, right? And even when his father doubted him, his dream did not go away because he trusted the Lord who gave him that dream. And I think there will be instances where, as we navigate this, right? Like the first example, are we running after a role? Are we running after positions? Are we running after projects basis what we want or basis what the world has defined? Or is it aligned to what God has put in your heart? Is it aligned to the journey God has drawn out for you? And I think that is where Joseph held on to that dream. He was steadfast. When he was betrayed, when he was sold to slavery, never did he doubt. He was never bitter. And I think that's a critical aspect. And then secondly, I think when we talk about patience, right? He was next to king. He was ruling the affairs. When his brothers come, so Genesis 39, 29 to 21 to 23, right? We read the whole chapter, and then when his brothers see him and they're scared, he tells, I'm Joseph. And I think it's beautiful when he says that, do not be afraid, right? Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it is to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. His dream, his vision was not corrupted by anything that happened in his life. And even in that moment, it is that purpose and vision that made him forgive. Right? So through your life, I think you're going to have people talking about you. You're going to have people misleading you, sidelining you, right? How we choose to behave in each of these instances will decide how our impact is held in this corporate world, right? I think this story I have said in my other previous testimonies, but I'm still going to kind of give an overview to it. One of the organizations where I worked, I'm not taking names, right, had the culture of networking, their so-called networking, right? And that networking included going into smoke parties, going into drink parties, spending time till 2 a.m. in each other's houses, gossiping. And that was that core group. I chose to exclude myself from that and maybe even voiced out concerns regarding that. And so for almost 4 years, in spite of being a top performer, growth would not come to me. I was always sidelined. There would be others who would be chosen ahead of me. Throughout that entire journey, of course, I spoke to the leads, but never once did I raise a voice or create a scene or threaten. But I just left it to the Lord. And my prayer always, I think from the last 20 years, whenever I feel the toughest situations, I would just kneel down and say, Abba, I don't have any godfathers in this place. I do not have anybody. I can't trust anyone, but I have you. That has been my heart's cry, which has led me every single day. So even in that instance, I said, Lord, I don't know what to do. But I continued to work. I continued to bring in business, and I was bringing in the highest revenue for my service line. At the right time, God opened up a door, took me to another organization where I grew, and I almost thought I was going to retire there. But God had other plans. When I was just settling down, He made things a little uncomfortable around me, and I started getting restless. You won't believe, there were so many doors that opened, but the only door that worked for me was the same organization that I walked out of. And He brought me back to this organization A at a level well above all my ex-bosses. So today I've come back to that place at 2 or 3 levels above my peers of that time and my bosses of that time. So I think the God of Esther, the God of Daniel, the God of Joseph, right? The God who is leading our lives is the master. He's the author and finisher of our faith. So as long as every step that you take in your career is guided by Him, as long as every action that you do is guided by the intent that I am here because He has placed me here, not because I own it, not because I belong. I do not belong in any of these places. I'm someone, I think, no matter where I've reached, at every group, every organization, I've always felt like a misfit. We are. We don't belong to this world. We don't belong to these cultures. We are misfits. And it is okay to be misfits and lead this journey with His grace, with His wisdom, with His prudence, with integrity, and with excellence. And I think that is the key of how I have navigated these places in the competitive environment and grown, but in roles and in places where He has placed us. Not I, but Christ. And I think that has been the story that has led me. So with that, I think I'll close. And I know we have case studies where I think we're talking about is it business result versus people. So I will let each one of you kind of discuss that, and thank you.